I try to avoid that, but I think it's unavoidable.
You know, I can't do this forever. I've been doing it since I was 21. As you move into your 80s, you say, hey, that's enough.
Robert Redford has always been known as one of the brightest stars in Hollywood, a man whose face, charm, and talent shaped an entire era of film. To the world, he was the fearless Sundance Kid, the sharp journalist in All the President's Men, and the quiet but commanding presence in dozens of classic movies. But while millions admired his career and his good looks, very few ever knew the private struggles he carried within his heart. In recent times, his daughter Amy Redford spoke with a heavy voice about her father's hidden battles and the emotional weight that marked his final years. Her confession revealed a side of Robert Redford that was rarely seen in public, vulnerable, deeply human, and at times broken by grief. These words did not just expose the truth about his later years. They also reshaped how fans around the world remember the man behind the legend. Amy's confession is not only sad but also filled with admiration, because she described her father not only as an actor and a star, but as a man who endured pain, loss, and yet held on to love and purpose until the very end. Robert Redford was born on August 18, 1936, in Santa Monica, California. His beginnings were far from the Hollywood spotlight. He grew up in a modest family environment that valued hard work, tradition, and simple living. Yet even in those early years, Amy Redford explains, her father carried an inner conflict. He was creative, drawn to painting and art, but also burdened by the expectations of fitting into a more traditional path. In the 1950s, he enrolled at the University of Colorado, hoping to live up to these expectations. But those years proved to be some of his hardest. He struggled with academic pressure, self-doubt, and the lure of alcohol, which began to pull him into a darker phase of life. Eventually, he dropped out of college, a moment that could have ended his dreams. Instead, it became a painful turning point. Seeking clarity and escape, he traveled to Europe, where he pursued painting. Although painting never became his profession, it left a lasting mark on him. Amy shared that this period of painting shaped his sensitivity, his emotions, and even the way he later acted and directed films. Behind every strong character on screen was a man who had once struggled to find himself, who had turned his personal pain into art. This hidden struggle, Amy explained, remained a part of him even as he rose to stardom. By the 1960s, Robert Redford began to make a name for himself in Hollywood. He first gained attention on Broadway and Barefoot in the Park and later moved into films, quickly rising to fame with roles that showcased his natural charm and intensity. Movies like Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid and The Sting cemented him as a household name, while later roles and directing achievements earned him Oscars and critical acclaim. Yet, as Amy revealed, this outward success often hid an inner sadness. The world saw a man who had everything: fame, fortune, respect, but few knew that his personal life was marked by grief. His confidence on screen often covered a quieter sorrow at home. Amy confessed that her father was a man who could laugh, entertain, and shine under the spotlight. But when the cameras stopped rolling, he sometimes sat in silence, burdened by memories of loss and regret. While Hollywood celebrated him as a legend, he carried the emotional scars of his personal tragedies, which shaped his choices in both his career and his relationships. His art was not just a performance, it was an expression of everything he had endured in private. Perhaps the deepest wounds of Robert Redford's life came from his role as a father. In 1958, he married Lola Van Wagenen, his first wife, with whom he hoped to build a stable and happy family. But soon after, tragedy struck. Their first son, Scott, died as an infant due to illness. Redford later admitted this was one of the darkest moments of his life, a pain that never left him. Amy explained that her father would often mention Scott with a quiet sadness, even decades later, as though the child remained a part of him. The couple went on to have more children, including Shauna, Jaime, and Amy herself. Yet heartbreak returned when Jaime was born prematurely and nearly died from a serious condition that made every breath a struggle. Though he survived, his childhood and adult years were filled with painful health battles. Jaime was later diagnosed with ulcerative colitis and eventually needed a liver transplant. Redford, who was in the middle of his directing career, often rushed between film sets and hospital visits, unwilling to leave his son's side. This devotion showed the depth of his love, but it also drained him emotionally. Amy remembered how exhausted her father looked during those years, but he never stopped supporting Jaime. These family tragedies shaped Robert Redford's outlook on life, leaving him both grateful for survival and deeply aware of life's fragility. While Robert Redford's career reached new heights during the 1970s and 1980s, his marriage with Lola carried the heavy strain of both fame and family struggles. They had started their life together with very little, determined to build a future. But the loss of Scott Jaime's ongoing health issues and the pressure of Robert's Hollywood schedule placed an unbearable weight on their relationship. As Redford's career soared with films like The Natural and Out of Africa, he was often away from home for long periods. Lola, meanwhile, was left to carry the responsibilities of family life alone. After 28 years of marriage, they separated in 1985. Robert later described the divorce as mutual, but admitted it was filled with regret. According to Amy, this too haunted her father in his later years. He regretted the strain that fame had put on his family and the moments he missed as a husband and father. This guilt and sorrow stayed with him, shaping his reflections during his final days. He was a man admired by millions, but also someone who carried the deep scars of personal choices and losses. For Amy, her father's story was not just about success, it was also about the sacrifices he made, both willingly and unwillingly, as life pulled him in different directions. In 2020, Robert Redford faced one of the greatest heartbreaks of his life when his son Jaime passed away at the age of 58 from liver cancer. For Redford, this was not just the loss of a child, but the loss of a man who had become both a partner and a friend. Jaime had grown into a filmmaker and an environmental activist, following in his father's footsteps of creativity and social responsibility. Together, they had worked on projects that combined storytelling with a mission to protect the planet. To Robert, Jaime was not only a son, but a collaborator in both art and purpose. Amy explained that Jaime's death broke her father in ways words could not capture. It reopened the wound of losing Scott decades earlier and reminded him once more of how fragile life truly is. Robert retreated into the quiet of his Utah ranch to grieve, valuing privacy during this painful time. Though public statements were made, Amy revealed that the true depth of her father's grief could never be understood by the public. Losing Jaime left a permanent shadow over Robert's final years, one that Amy says was impossible to ignore. Beyond family, Robert Redford was also shaped by the friendships he built in Hollywood, some of which brought him joy and others that ended in heartbreak. One of his earliest and most cherished friendships was with Natalie Wood, his co-star in Inside Daisy Clover in 1965. Natalie recognized his talent early on and supported him as he entered the difficult world of Hollywood. Their friendship lasted for years until Natalie's tragic death in 1981, when she drowned under mysterious circumstances. This loss devastated Robert, who carried her memory with him for the rest of his life. Another important friendship was with Paul Newman, his co-star in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Sting. Their on-screen chemistry translated into a real-life brotherhood, filled with loyalty, humor, and support. When Robert's marriage ended, it was Paul Newman who stood by his side. Their friendship was one of the most important in Redford's life. When Newman passed away in 2008, Robert described it as losing a part of himself. Amy said her father often reflected on these friendships in his later years, cherishing the joy but also haunted by the losses. These relationships reminded him of life's fleeting nature and the importance of connection, even in the face of grief. As Robert Redford entered his 80s, the signs of time became harder to ignore. The actor, once known for his athletic build and active lifestyle, found himself slowing down. Amy shared that her father, who once filled his days with skiing, hiking, and long hours of work, began to spend more time in reflection and quiet rest. Physical aches that once seemed temporary became permanent, and the bursts of energy that defined his youth were replaced with fatigue. Yet even as his body weakened, his spirit remained focused on purpose. He continued to support the Sundance Institute, which he had founded to help independent filmmakers, and he stayed committed to environmental causes. Amy explained that although her father grew quieter and more reflective, he never gave up on the things he believed in most. These later years were marked not just by decline, but by dignity, as Robert sought to ensure that his legacy was not only about films, but also about creating opportunities and protecting the planet. His slowing pace was not a defeat, but a natural part of life, which he accepted with grace. When Amy Redford finally opened up about her father's final days, her words carried both sorrow and love. She described him as a man who had lived through more pain than most people ever knew, a man who carried the weight of losing 2 sons, the collapse of a marriage, and the death of close friends. These were not small wounds, but lifelong scars that shaped who he was. In public, Robert Redford appeared as the golden hero of Hollywood, but in private, he was a man who knew grief deeply. Amy confessed that in his last years, her father often spent more time looking back than forward, reflecting on the cost of his extraordinary journey. Fame had brought him success, but had also robbed him of peace and privacy. Yet despite the burdens, he found meaning in his family, his grandchildren, and the causes he cared for. Amy's confession stripped away the glamour and revealed her father as someone who, in the end, was not defined by Hollywood but by love, resilience, and his quiet fight to leave something meaningful behind. Robert Redford's story is more than the tale of a Hollywood star. Through Amy's confession, the world now sees a fuller picture, a man who lived with both triumph and tragedy, who carried grief alongside greatness. His final days were not about fame or applause, but about reflection, love, and the search for peace. The tragedies he endured, from the death of his children to the loss of close friends, shaped him as much as his successes did. Yet he remained devoted to his family, to his work, and to his belief that art and activism could change the world. Amy's confession may be heartbreaking, but it also honors her father's resilience and humanity. Robert Redford's legacy will always shine on the big screen, but his true story is found in the quiet strength with which he faced life's deepest sorrows. For fans and loved ones alike, his journey is a reminder that behind every legend is a human being, fragile and strong, broken and beautiful, who lived and loved until the very end. For Robert Redford, fame was both a gift and a curse. On one hand, it gave him opportunities most people could only dream of, lifting him from modest beginnings into the heart of Hollywood's golden era. On the other hand, it robbed him of something he valued deeply, his privacy. Redford was always a man who preferred quiet over noise, nature over city lights, and meaningful conversations over superficial praise. Yet, from the moment he starred in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, his life was no longer his own. Crowds followed him, reporters wanted a piece of his story, and studios demanded constant work. While fans adored him, Redford often struggled with the pressure of being an icon. Amy revealed that her father sometimes felt trapped inside his own image. People saw him as the perfect star, handsome, talented, untouchable, but he felt far from perfect. This tension between who he truly was and what the world wanted him to be left him drained at times. In later interviews, Redford admitted that he often retreated to his ranch in Utah, not just for peace, but for survival. Surrounded by mountains and open skies, he could breathe again, free from the endless eyes of Hollywood. Amy said this ranch was not just a home but a safe place where her father could finally be himself, man who wanted nothing more than to walk among trees, paint, and spend quiet evenings with family. This hidden battle with fame explains why Redford avoided the Hollywood lifestyle and why, in his final days, he cherished solitude more than applause. If there is one project beyond acting that defined Robert Redford's vision, it is the Sundance Institute and the Sundance Film Festival. Founded in the early 1980s, Sundance became a home for independent filmmakers who often struggled to find support in a Hollywood dominated by big studios. Redford knew what it meant to fight for artistic freedom, and he wanted to give others a chance to tell their stories without compromise. Amy explained that her father poured his soul into Sundance, believing that film was not just entertainment but a tool to change minds and open hearts. The festival grew from a small event in Utah to one of the most respected platforms for independent cinema worldwide. Films that later shaped culture first appeared at Sundance, proving Redford's vision right. But behind the success was also his personal mission. For Robert, Sundance was not just about movies, it was about giving voice to those who felt silenced, much like he once felt during his own struggles. Amy shared that her father saw Sundance as a second chance, not just for filmmakers, but for himself. It gave him purpose beyond acting and directing, especially in his later years. Even as his health weakened, he remained involved, checking on projects, encouraging young filmmakers, and reminding them that truth in art mattered more than fame. Through Sundance, Redford created a legacy that will outlive him, one built not on celebrity, but on giving others the power to dream. While the world mostly remembers Robert Redford as an actor and filmmaker, Amy emphasized that another side of him was just as important: his role as an activist. Long before environmental issues became a common topic, Redford was already raising awareness. He loved nature deeply, perhaps because it gave him peace when fame felt suffocating. Mountains, rivers, and forests were not just scenery for him. They were sacred places that needed protection. Redford used his fame to speak against climate change, pollution, and the destruction of wildlife habitats. He worked with organizations like the Natural Resources Defense Council and testified before Congress to fight for environmental policies. Amy explained that this work gave her father strength, especially in his final years. Even when he felt weak physically, he still cared enough to speak up for the planet. For him, protecting nature was not just political, it was personal. His Utah ranch, surrounded by natural beauty, reminded him every day of why this fight mattered. Amy confessed that in their private talks, her father often said he wanted his grandchildren to grow up in a world where the sky was still blue, the rivers still clear, and the mountains still full of life. This vision kept him going, even when grief threatened to break him. In his final days, the cause of protecting the earth gave him hope that something good would live on after him, something larger than fame and larger than loss. One of the most moving truths Amy shared was her father's role as a parent. Despite his fame and busy schedule, Robert Redford always